Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another of our podcasts with Real Fitness, Real Talk. And this episode, we're going to go over um, more of what we left off with our guest of honor again, Harrison Kuhn. I got that right. And Michael, our one of our head trainers there. And then Peter's off on location having a good time. And we wish him a great weekend. Uh, well, with that being said, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Great, man. Happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day out today. Nice, gorgeous Sunday. Eagles won.
It's the autumn. Oh, Eagles, dude! I'm not even sure what's going on with sports over there.
Well, all you need to know is that the Eagles won. We're
Eagles
good.
won. Okay, we're good then. All right. Well, so last time we talked, we were talking about the hips, or was it the back? It was because
We're talking about
the back.
But everything essentially,
Everything.
right? Because
Right.
it kind of comes back for everything. But yeah, we did. We talked about back, and then we talked about knees,
Right.
and they were talking about shoulders. Yeah.
Right. So it's all part of the mobility of our bodies, and now we're going to move up the region to this area, the shoulder area. All right. So which a lot of people experience a lot of discomfort because we're doing so much with this, against gravity, pushing, pulling. So all sorts of things can happen if we don't stay mobile. And I think that's what's causing a lot of chronic problems is because we're frozen so much, and then we do things all of a sudden, and then all hell breaks loose. So let's get into it. So I'll start with the first question. So Harrison, this is the question that we have here. I'm going to read it out. The shoulder is one of the most mobile joints in the body, but also one of the most injured prone. What are some of the most common mistakes you see people making in the gym that messes up their shoulders? And that happens a lot. So that's a great question to start off with. Let's see where this takes us.
I can speak from experience.
Me too.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody can. I think the shoulder, it kind of goes back to the first part of the question, which is, how mobile the shoulder is, right? And that's sort of, gives you a lot of your answer right there with the way that our shoulders are designed, which is very, very, pro mobility. What we get in mobility, we lack in stability, right? And it's a really, quite an unstable joint. It's really like four joints actually. So, you have the actual, what we would call like the ball and socket shoulder joint. But it's not even really a ball and socket. It's more like a golf tee. Like it's pretty much a flat wall with a little bit of indentation. And then you've got the ball on it there. So even the ball and socket part is very unstable. And then you've got, your sternoclavicular joint, which is where your breastbone, sternum meets your clavicle, your collarbone. And then you have the AC joint, the acromioclavicular joint, which is where your collarbone meets your shoulder blade. And it's just basically like two little branches, two little twigs, attached by a little ligament right there. So, it's not a very complex or super stable or, functional joint. And then you have your scapulothoracic joint, which is where the shoulder blade meets the rib cage, which isn't really even much of a joint because it's kind of the shoulder blade just sort of floating in space, right?
Right.
It doesn't actually touch the rib cage. There's muscles and tissues that lie in between the shoulder blade and the rib cage. So, you've got like four really, not awesome joints that kind of work together to make a pretty exceptional joint of the shoulder. So it's a very complex and like delicate thing. And that's why, when we were talking about rolling through this series, I was thinking the shoulder would probably be the best to save for last, just because, the knee is a little bit less complex in terms of the structure of the joint. The shoulder is pretty complicated, honestly. Where we see it go wrong often is, to your point, I think we're just not using our shoulders as much as we usually do. So if somebody is, let's say, working at a desk for 8 hours, and then they're going out and they're doing a high intensity exercise, if they have never done it before, it definitely could be something that could be a little risky, right? If they're not going overhead at all, if they're not using their arms except for right at their sides, right? I think where it goes wrong most often is probably when we're nearest our end ranges. So what I mean by that is like mostly like flexion and extension. I would say flexion would be lifting your arm up overhead, extension doing the opposite. How far does your elbow go back behind your shoulder, basically? So whenever we're in those extreme ranges, those sort of end ranges, I think that's when it's most likely that, things don't go so well for people. Examples of what that would be like an overhead press, right? If you're going all the way overhead or anything really overhead, especially I think presses more so than pulling. And then, an example of the extension piece would be like maybe a dip or a push up if your hands are elevated or something and you're going really deep into a push up. That would be sort of end range extension, right?
Right. And that's
Or
all.
for that matter too. If you're doing a row, let's say, and your elbow is driving back really, really far, at a certain point, right, you're going to reach the end range, which, the elbow goes back more and more. And then the shoulder then is going to start pushing forward onto the front of the capsule. And there's other stuff there too, the bicep tendon, which I'm sure we'll talk about, more today, because that's a pretty commonly injured tissue and a pretty overlooked tissue in terms of diagnoses.
Yeah, when I think about all the things you just mentioned, of all, like, not just one part of the joint, but just varieties, and then comes the attachment to all that. That's what makes it complicated, and that's what causes all those surprising little hidden injuries just waiting to erupt, because we overstepped our boundaries of our range of motions. That's causing, and I think we all have experienced that. But here, listening to it, uh, you know, you start to have that epiphany, like, yeah, I get that, because I remember doing stuff where I did cause a lot of my injuries, especially in my interior part of my shoulders, right? Not knowing that it was coming from back here because of what I did of overextending a couple years ago uh, on the push or pull. So it definitely, I think everybody goes through that. I think all of us could have a memory of a client or ourselves seeing that mistake, right?
Yeah, and
So
that's also just, in one dimension, right? That's just forward and backward. And the shoulder, like we talked about, is so mobile. It can do all these amazing things. It can go, it can rotate, it can come across your body, it can go, back behind in all these amazing directions. That's just to give, some examples, but also to say, like, I'm not saying that stuff is bad to do, right? I'm not saying that dips are bad for you. I'm not saying that anything overhead pressing is bad for you, or rows or anything like that. Like, I think those are all excellent options. Just like anything else in the gym, it's like you just want to make sure that you are progressing to that in a smart, reasonable, logical way. I think for a lot of people too, especially with the overhead stuff, they just don't really have that much range of motion to start with. So if I test somebody and see like how much true range of motion they have, most of the time it's somewhere between like 140 to 160 degrees, right? That's 160 would be pretty good actually. And with a shoulder overhead press, in theory, it's sort of a 180-degree angle from where the arm is to where your torso is, right? If you're straight up overhead, right? So I think the fact of the matter is just a lot of people just don't end up starting with that amount of range of motion, and you can get it, right? Especially if you're going smart and being gradual about how you progress things. But I think, fresh off the street for a lot of people, especially if they're not doing a lot of stuff overhead on a day-to-day basis, they're just desk job or whatever. I think it's definitely more challenging and a little bit riskier for that person to just like, have at it in the gym, without any guidance.
So when it comes to the overhead press, what would you recommend? So let's say we've got a new person in and they don't have that good 180-degree angle with the overhead press, sort of like the arm tracking along the ear. Do you think just doing like partial reps or even like pressing slightly in front is a way to modify an exercise to make it more accessible for people who lack the range of motion?
It's an awesome question. Yeah, I would say a couple of different things come to mind. I love like an incline, press. And I know at Real Fitness, we have the benches that are capable of going all the way from flat all the way up. So that is a really nice way to gradually progress somebody, where you can start them at, maybe like a 60-degree angle and then work them up, to a 90-degree angle. So that's a really nice way to do it. I like what you said about the partial reps too, or like, not going all the way up. I think that's a good idea. I don't always have them reach forward though on that kind of press. I always want them to keep a vertical forearm, because if they reach forward too much, right, then the gravity is kind of like pulling the whole arm down this way, and then it's a lot more stress on the deltoid there. So it just, if the weight is too much, that could be not the best. But the landmine, which we also have at Real Fitness, and I see you using that all the time, Mike, I think is also a really, really awesome option for somebody. And it's so easy to manipulate that, just based on where they stand. So if they're really, pretty fresh, whether that's off an injury or just like learning how to press in general, you can have them a little further back from the anchor point of the landmine. And if they're, a more advanced, you can get them closer to the anchor point, so it's a little bit more of like an upwardly pushing motion. So I think that all of those are really great options for somebody who you can just tell, like, if you have them do a press, like, it just looks awkward. Sometimes you'll see them like lean back quite a bit in their upper body, right? Like you'll see their chest and head kind of like arch back quite a bit, or you'll see their elbow flaring out quite a bit and like sort of winging a little bit. And again, that's usually more of a mobility or like tissue restriction issue. But it's still something that you can kind of work around. So those are the things to look at for those, for that movement in particular. Like that's the type of stuff you're looking for to see if somebody, and if someone's listening to this too, who does work out, if they feel like, yeah, I can feel my going into my back a little bit, or I can't really get to that position, or like usually it's one shoulder is more awkward than the other. They can't get that, shoulder to ear. That's when it's like, okay, maybe there's just a smarter way to do this. If you want to do it standing, again, I would say you could do it, like you said, partial rep, not going all the way to the top, not feeling like you have to lock out, which I don't really like anyone to do anyway, like lock out their elbow at the top. Or, there's other ways to set it up too, where you can do like a split stance, and even almost do like a single arm press usually is a little bit safer, because then you don't have compression on both sides. You can press with one arm, and you can almost like side bend your torso a little bit away from it, which again isn't a bad thing. It's not a bad movement. It's a movement that, we should all be able to do. But, again, if it's somebody's first time, if you're listening out there, don't go really heavy doing that on your. But yeah, but that single arm can be really nice too, because it doesn't have as much compression. You have that other side that you can kind of leak over towards a little bit, to help relieve some of the restriction there.
The positioning of the elbow lifting up from sort of in the front or out to the side, do you have an opinion about like one you like better than the other?
Yeah, I tend to kind of keep the elbow out in front quite a bit. I think for a lot of people, they just don't have a lot of range of motion back here. They get pretty compressed pretty quickly. And I think that's probably sort of a sign of the times too, of just like most people are pretty tight in this area from, posturally, right? Like if they're at the computer a lot, or if they're on their phone a lot, which almost all of us are for one reason or another, it kind of pulls our shoulder sort of over the top, down and forward, basically. And so when that's the case, you don't tend to have as much like this. Usually, like if you're going arms out, like a military press, let's say, right, where your arms are out wide, most people really struggle in that range of motion. Just like if they're laying on the ground, that can be pretty tight for them. So it's like now you take that and then you're adding load, can be. I think, there's it's a gray area in terms of like there's space in between right in front and all the way out, right? So 45-degree angle essentially, right? Anything in that sort of space I think is usually fine. But I almost never have anybody like all the way out, elbows in line with their shoulders out to the sides, like in line with their ears basically, and then pressing from there.
Used. It's uh, uh, our interior deltoid. And then I noticed that when I have my arms out doing any dumbbell press and I go too far down, I can start feeling that stretch where you feel like it's gonna pop,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then when I have my elbows centered, I feel more support because then my core engages where I feel that support, right, and that security where I don't feel like that sensation of being stretched out. But I think it's also the way it's designed, because even when we rotate back, it it exposes more of that anterior deltoid than when you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
it
it's
in,
putting it at more length, which it's just like you said, where it feels like it's getting like
yeah.
overstretched. Basically, that's exactly
And
what's
that,
happening if you're going too far.
right, and that's where you have to like know where your limit range of motion is to keep it there, or else
Yeah.
Exactly.
something else gets involved, and that's where you start building up that risk.
And
Right, if you
that's
And what
don't.
do you think about the bench press? About going deep on the bench press as well, sort of driving the elbows back and up. I mean, do you feel like that's a pretty safe, or maybe the more the load is, the more risk there is to the shoulder? Just out of
Totally.
curiosity.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and yes. I mean, so I'll say this. As with any of these exercises that we'll talk about today, like I'm not going to say that any of them are bad exercises. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're all good exercises if like we talked about, if they're gradually introduced, there's start with lightweight and build up over time. I think that anything can be good. It's like there's like we say, there's no bad movements. There's just movements that you're not prepared for, right? So I think for me personally, I don't like bench press, both in my own training and when I'm working with people. It's just not a thing that I do with people anymore because it's a
You
little
mean a flat bench, not the
A barbell, you think like
barbell flat
barbell
bench.
a barbell.
flat bench. And I specifically
Got it.
mean with a barbell. Yes.
Got you.
A dumbbell press is something I do regularly for sure in my own training and also with clients. Absolutely. So that's sort of where, what the distinction is there is specifically with a barbell, like a classic, traditional bench press. I tend to find that doesn't really work that well for a lot of people. Because you're so locked in, your hands are locked into that position of being fully pronated, right? Which means you're in a lot of internal rotation in the shoulder. For a lot of people, that's the motion that they lack. So when you're doing that and then you're coming down, and I think if you go deep enough, it can definitely cause some issues because the shoulder really at that point wants to externally rotate when you're coming down. So, like if you're doing it with a dumbbell, let's say, right? Um, how I'll usually do it is my palms will face away from me, like face, where my feet are pointing, the wall in front of me, if you will, at the top, right? That's that sort of internally rotated pronated, which is sort of what we want when we're pushing up, pushing the weight up. And then when we're coming down, that's a more externally rotated, biased part of the movement. So we want to be able to let the shoulders, everything kind of naturally externally rotate and supinate. So it's kind of like, you want to almost have the palms face each other a little bit more on the way down. Ideally, that would be the most comfortable, the most like biomechanically, efficient or, safe, if you will, on the shoulder. But because when you're doing that on a barbell, your hands are locked in that position facing that wall where your feet are pointing to. So it just creates a pretty high demand for mobility in those positions where you're already kind of taxed at mobility. So it's just one of those things that can, I think, for a lot of people, really cause some trouble if they're going really heavy and they don't normally go really heavy. I'll say that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know
I
where I found this, but I had been told that like mimics like a punch when you're
Exactly.
doing a
Yeah.
dumbbell, yeah, chest press.
Yeah.
Like palms are neutral, and then the palms will pronate at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's right. And then, obviously it's like, art imitates life type of thing, right? It's like there's a reason that the punch is designed like that's how people punch, right? It's for I don't know how long have people been punching, right? I mean, hundreds of thousands of years. People have been figuring out how to create the most efficient, the most powerful movement, and that's sort of what it is, right? And it allows, part of it is that the dynamic of the shoulder and the shoulder blade, and we may talk about this more today depending on where the conversation goes, but that's a big part of where I see pain with people in pain, and just people that generally aren't moving very well. Often there's some not great movement happening or not movement at all happening at the shoulder blade, right? But they should sort of work together as a team and sort of coupled movements. So when you're let's say you're pressing to the top of that, right? The shoulder is going to be rotating inward, when that happens, the shoulder blade should be rotating inward as well, which kind of means coming around to the front. So, like at the top of a push up, let's say, or a top of a bench press, you want your shoulder blades to be coming sort of apart at the top, right? Away from each other. And then sort of vice versa on the way down, right? And this goes for rows. This goes for, like, you said like a punch. It's the same thing as like a row, right? Like you would maybe start here, and then you would, allow your hand, your shoulder to rotate as you're doing a row as you come to the top too. So those movements mimic each other as well. But in general, just to say, like, that's why I don't love the barbell stuff as much, is because when your hand is locked into that position, it just makes it more challenging to keep the shoulder its happiest, I would say, by allowing those movements to come through. Now, I do think it's incredibly efficient if your goal is to, like, just move as much weight as possible. Dumbbell press is probably not the best choice for you because you have a lot of inherent stability with the bar there that you don't have to worry about, right? When you're doing dumbbells, your shoulders are constantly trying to stabilize, and that takes effort. That makes it harder to do that pound for pound than a bench press with a barbell. But you get some stability, training with that, if you will, right? So that could be another pro if you decide to use a dumbbell press, is that, okay, maybe I'm not pushing as much weight as I could with a barbell, but I'm getting back some stability gains, by controlling the path of my elbow and my hand.
But in general, having free weights gives you more freedom to be more comfortable, right? For your free fluidity in your natural movements
Yeah,
versus a fixed bar, right? So,
that's right.
I'm always thinking there should be like like an awareness of the risk factor of increasing your risk of injury when you are using uh, uh, a fixed fixture
Hmm.
that will alter your natural movement,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I think for somebody who's just starting off on a dumbbell press too, like that can have its risks as well, right? Because if they don't know how to stabilize or like smoothly do the pattern or not go too deep or any of that stuff, it's like instead of just controlling one thing, now you got two things, that you're trying
Right.
to control on each hand. So I think, yeah, I think that's where it comes, for us as coaches, there's a big importance of, no matter which movement you choose, right? You're coaching it well and making sure that it's within a comfortable range where you don't see any compensation or stuff like
so is that your so would the dumbbell be, if let's say you're going heavy with dumbbells, which you couldn't, but you could go heavier with a straight bar. What is true strength then?
that. Ooh, good question. I don't know, true strength.
Which one is the true strength there?
I think both of them would be. I mean, if you're just looking for, like, like I said, if you just want to see like how much weight possibly can I push, like, I guess if you're saying true strength, would probably be more the barbell. Just because, like I said, you could probably stack a lot more weight on the barbell and be
But
able
your
to do
risk,
that.
the risk goes up though,
Yeah, I think
right?
so. Yeah. Hmm.
But
Yeah.
with dumbbells,
It's all
you're
it's all trade-offs
yeah,
always in the gym, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, do how do we pick the thing that's the least risky with the highest reward, right?
right.
And sometimes to get high rewards, you have to, there's going to be some inherent risk, of course, right? You can't get really strong, lifting 2 pound dumbbells forever, right? Like eventually you do have to progressive overload, right? If you want to
And have
see.
you seen the 100-pound dumbbells? They're just. Could you imagine what like a 200-pound dumbbell? That'd be crazy. All right, with this right, this brings us to the next question here. So let's say maybe somebody new, or even somebody experienced, has been working out and they're feeling some things going on with the shoulder. Like, how would you, or what would you say would be a way to know when this is just a normal kind of, you might have a tweak, you might have something going on there where it just needs a little bit of rest, or when do they need to go see somebody like you to start working on maybe some rehab? Like, what would be a
Yeah.
good indication there?
I think it is tough to say because I'll get people that I'm working with who get an MRI on their shoulder, and it's like, for whatever reason, and it turns out it's way worse than we thought, and sometimes vice versa. So it's hard to say. I don't think with shoulders it's very it's not always like cut and dry as to like, hey, this hurts, I think there's a problem in here. I think most people, and especially in their like 40s, 50s, 60s, like are probably going to have some amount of rotator cuff tearing, just I think everyone kind of will, especially if they're an active person. There might be some labrum, this or that in there as well. So it's kind of hard to say, because you could say, hey, now's the time to go, and then you take a look and you see, okay, there's some stuff going on here, but that stuff could have been there well prior to them feeling some discomfort. I would say probably, if it feels like they cannot do something, like, okay, I'm trying to do this movement and I just like can't, like my shoulder either just gives out, or like the pain is essentially too much, like it just like doesn't want to go there. That's usually a pretty good indication of like, it's not, probably not just like, oh, I pinch something. I think it just depends too on like where you're feeling it, right? If you're feeling it, you know, where it feels like it's just around or inside the joint, that's usually a pretty good indication of, okay, there might be something going on there that's not, feeling so good. If it's more in this like soft tissue, like if it's, let's say, kind of in the upper trap area, that's an area where people commonly, are probably doing too much and experience tightness or experience, some pain, right? So that would be maybe, okay, you can probably wait a couple of days. Same thing with like the, the pec area and the front of the chest. And, sometimes in the back of the shoulder as well. But with shoulder stuff too, it can be a lot of referred pain where it's like where you feel the pain isn't actually the structure that's damaged, right? Like rotator cuff pain cannot necessarily feel like it's right where the rotator cuff muscles are, but it can show up in other places, so to speak. So I think it's with shoulders, it's really tough to know, but I think especially if you're like, okay, every time I get into this, like, ooh, that really hurts, or like, yeah, I know I don't want to go there. Like I'm trying to get there and it's just like, it doesn't want to go. I think that's usually pretty, if you can move through it and it's like, yeah, it doesn't feel great, but like I can do my normal mobility, like I can move the way that I sort of need to move. I think then it's maybe worth waiting a little bit. But again, it just depends on how quickly you want to, get the problem solved or just get it checked out. Yeah.
Something I've been experiencing in my sort of rehabbing on this shoulder is it starts to click sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like popping through the joint. It's not necessarily painful. It's just it's an odd sensation. Now, in my mind, and I'm not an expert at this at all, but I'm telling myself this because like I don't want to. I'm like, oh, it's just breaking through scar tissue or what because of the injury. Is there truth to that? Is that something that if that is happening, it's like you can work through that, or is that something you think somebody should back off and just kind of rest if you start to feel that sensation?
Yeah, I think the breaking up, scar tissue is definitely one of the theories. There are multiple theories on this. Some people say it's like cavitation, which is just essentially like pressure changes within the joint. So as the joint is moving, through that specific range of motion for whatever reason, the pressure is changing, and that's causing like, some people say it's like essentially gas bubbles to be like popping. So it can be like a inside the joint, some people say. Other people say it's essentially tendons that are kind of like moving over bone. So I don't know that we for sure know yet as like a, rehab community of when there's a cracking or a clicking or a popping, like exactly what's going on. It probably depends on a case by case basis. I think for you, knowing your situation and stuff, is definitely a chance that it is some scar tissue in there that, that's just moving or mobilizing or just kind of making itself be heard in those moments. Generally, the consensus is amongst the rehab community, like if there is that sort of clicking or popping and it's without the presence of pain, you're probably okay to resume through that, that movement. It's not necessarily something you need to like stop and stop moving. And I think probably if you stop moving for like a month because you wanted to like see if it would go away, that might actually be more detrimental to you in the long run than just continuing to move. So hopefully that answers that. Yeah.
It's just a wild sensation. And like, sorry. And if I'm like, oh, it's not painful, sometimes it's hard to discern between, is it painful, is it not, because it's such a new thing that it's a bit shocking. But yes, to your point, like
It's
I'm not
unsettling.
feeling I'm not feeling pain per se, but in my mind it's a little unsettling because it's such a new kind of sensation. So, but yeah, I'm still trying to sort of like work through it and do as much as I can, to hopefully get to the other side of that.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we don't hear or feel anything like that in our
Yeah.
bodies. Unsettling, right? It's easy for me to say, but when it's like your shoulder, right? Like you're like, oh, I'd rather it not be there, of course. So I do think, it's definitely something that most people have the same thought or feeling of like, oh no, what, like do I need to take care of this? What do I need to do?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, probably there is some aspect of, um, restriction, whether it's tissue or just joint, that could be improved for you, and some sort of, yeah, I would say that's probably what I would say, is it's probably either a tissue that's restricted or the joint itself is being a little bit hyper compressed in a certain area for you.
Man, the more we get older, this is what I was going to share. I went through the same thing, and Harrison, you've helped me so much in my left shoulder. Well, both shoulders, they both had problems, right? And it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop because now I get busy with archery and paddle, that I started feeling sensation of tennis elbow, right? And I had a friend, Holden. You guys know Holden? Remember? So he was out here a couple of weeks ago, and he actually, we talked about it. So he looked it over, and to my surprise, it's in the same area that you killed me. Well, you didn't kill me, but where that
Yeah,
pain
yeah,
starts
yeah.
to generate, and it
Yeah.
was right under my armpit, right?
Yeah.
So it was like right in there, that all these, it was tight here, it was tight in my lat, and as soon as and we started using the ball,
Hmm.
getting in there and against the wall, all that pressure. And like, once I felt that sensation, I just rolled with with the muscle lining, and then where that sensation was, it building up until it just like went away, right? But it took a couple of days, but it was like all under here, real into here, right into here, into the lat, and then this started feeling better right here.
Yeah, well, it's kind of similar to what we've been talking about with knees and backs and stuff
Yeah,
like that, right? Where the joints, above and below play a really big part in it. And I think that's kind of going back to what we talked about with like a barbell bench, right? When the wrist is locked into a certain position, that elbow is much more locked into that position too. So there's not that freedom of movement, through the whole body, right? And so it can definitely, especially with like tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, like that shoulder restriction can definitely manifest in elbow or wrist, because when we have a shoulder that doesn't, move the way we need it to, the next joint up will basically help and try to overcompensate, do what it's necessarily not supposed to do, to help you achieve the task. Because like our bodies are incredible compensators, right? Like whatever our goal is, whatever task we're doing, it's going to find a way to do it, even if it means using joints that it probably shouldn't, or relying on those joints too much.
that's also the bad news, because it's like a wall, but the other side of the wall is this big lake, and then one hole pops, and then you put a finger there, then another hole pops. So it's like then you got a ripple effects, and you got all your toes covering holes, and you don't know where it came from.
Right.
So it's like a double-edged sword here. It's
Yeah.
That paints an
compensating, but it's
image.
right.
Yeah. You got to fix the bucket before you fill it up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that leads to another question. So people that do have great mobility and they have healthy shoulders, uh, and I think this is one of the things that people maybe are starting to change their behavior, but it's warming up. It's getting yourself ready for anything that has to do with resistance and mobility, especially in the joint area of the shoulder. So, what are things that anybody or everybody should do before doing any type of movement that requires a lot of stress to there. So what
Yeah. There's a few movements that I like for like warm up stuff. I would say the biggest one that comes to mind for me would be hanging. So like hanging on a pull up bar, or it doesn't even have to be like full overhead hanging. And we're talking about obviously somebody who's like you said, fully healthy and no shoulder issues. I think there's a ton of benefit to that movement, and obviously pull-ups, and you can do all sorts of different things from there. You can do like a scapular pull-up. I like all those movements, but just like the base position of just putting your hands on a bar and hanging out, essentially letting your rib cage fall away from the bar as much as you can, I think is awesome. I think especially if you can build up to be able to do that like on one hand at a time would be a really
oh,
good goal to try to
hanging
get.
on one hand and retracting like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or just even hanging, like letting the shoulder blade fully kind of come up towards your hand and letting your rib cage fall away. And a good way to kind of start that progression too, if you're able to do it with two legs, no problem. But going to one arm seems scary or doesn't feel that great, you can definitely do that with your feet on the ground essentially, and then you can kind of control how much assistance you're giving yourself by your feet. And so, that's a really good movement. It really depends on the person and like what their issue might be, right? Or like what their posture is like. For some people, if they are, on the desk a lot, or just, they have those kind of forward rounded shoulder posture, that there's a lot of different things that I would do for that person. Like, for example, one thing I really like for that person is just lying on a foam roller, like vertically. So with the foam roller along the length of your spine. So like your head's on the roller, your spine's on the roller, maybe your sacrum, the bottom of your spine's on the roller, and then your feet are, your knees are bent, your feet are on the ground. And then, just doing some stuff there. Some people do like angels where they're actively moving their arms up and down. Some people go just out into a T and hang out there. Some people go out with the elbows bent. That'll, bias, your pec major if you're out into a T with the arms straight. If the elbows are bent, you'll get a little bit more pec minor. So that's a really nice way to just kind of open things up there. Especially if there's someone who wants to do like a military style press or like more things out to the side, like we're talking about. I really like, isometrics and stuff too. So I do a lot of stuff with the hands on the wall, in different positions. You guys have probably done that with me or seen me do that.
Yeah, I
So either
remember.
like the hands low, like by your pocket, you can do it just like standing up next to a wall and just pushing your hand into the wall. The way that we did it probably, and the way that I do with a lot of people, is where they're actually using their body weight to leverage into the walls. The feet are a little bit behind their head, so they're kind of tipped forward into the wall a little bit. And we're doing some kind of funky looking things over on the wall. I think you guys have probably done some of that stuff with me. And so there's all different sort of hand positions you can get into with that, all different sort of body positions you can get into with that to just stress different tissues. So you can kind of work anything possible with that if you want to. That's stuff that I think people probably wouldn't necessarily know how to do on their own, but if they want to talk to me, I can show them a thing or two. I think doing stuff with your hands on the ground is also really beneficial. So spending some time there, like whether that's like a bear crawl type of thing, or even like a push up, or any sort of movements with your hands on the ground. Just having your honestly your wrists be extended like that, and your hands be extended like that is really good for people, especially people that are at a desk all day and they're typing or whatever, and their hands and wrists kind of are in this constant flexion. So I see a lot of people with nerve issues there too, where it's like carpal tunnel, or often that'll stem through the neck as well, and that'll feel like just like numbness in the arms. So I've had a lot of people, seems like more and more every year, reach out to me with those type of symptoms.
Hmm.
So that's those type of things where you're spending some time on your hands, you're opening up your chest a little bit. I think from a true mobility standpoint are really good things. And then like I said, the hanging is really great. And then obviously you want to do some sort of like movement prep that includes some contraction where you're actually like, working the muscles. So you can add that to any of those things that we just talked
What about band? Because I see a lot of people using bands, where they're pulling it
about.
apart, retracting, or they're going around their heads. I find that a little too risky when you're using those bands and you're doing a rotational stuff. I feel it kind of like in certain areas where you start feeling an anterior deltoid.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about working with bands?
Yeah, I don't that movement that you were just talking about, and I kind of saw what you were doing there on camera. I don't exactly know that I've seen that before, but obviously, like there's so many different moves that you can do. The pull apart stuff. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of that. The band stuff. I mean, there's some things that I think are really worthwhile with the band. Yeah, I've just kind of gotten away from doing the pull apart stuff. I don't know. I think for some people, it it's hard to get that right with the shoulder blades, and the shoulders. I think for many, their shoulder blades end up just kind of like popping off the rib cage and sort of like just kind of like slamming them together. Retraction is a good thing. The shoulder blades coming together is a good thing. But with that movement in particular, I feel like often it doesn't end up looking as sort of smooth or like as it's intended to be, because the shoulder blades will just pop off the ribs, and when that happens, it's kind of like, we're not really working the shoulder in the way we want it to work. I'm trying to think of like banded stuff that I do like. Anything where, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was gonna say, I think what Lucha just said that reminded me of is in gymnastics they have something called, literally it's called a shoulder dislocate, and
Mm,
it's when you have your both hands and you just basically draw a full circle all the way around your body and then come all the way back. And I think Lucha is referring to sort of the single arm version
Yes, right.
of the shoulder. Yeah,
I see. Yeah, yeah.
I can no longer. I used to be able to, but I can no longer do that without, like, I have to bend my elbows once it reaches, maybe
Right, right. Yeah,
200 degrees or whatever. Yeah.
I
Well, that's a
think that
risk.
goes back into the bucket of maybe no bad movements, but movements you're not prepared for. And I would say,
Right.
with at least the population that we're working with, there's going to be very, small percentage of people who can do that comfortably. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like a
Mm-hmm.
positive thing for, right? And for others, has the potential to be, you know, not additive, but subtractive potentially, yeah. So I think it just depends on who you're working with, but
What I'd heard once before, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like a great thing to do for the shoulder is things that's going to sort of pull into the joint, sort of like you were saying, like the rib cage falls away, sort of like when you're hanging, it's like it's pulling the joint. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, and it's kind of like going to plug a brand, but there's this mob stick, these mobility sticks that are out, and we've got one down at the gym. It's that orange stick, and
yeah,
I do this thing where I just hook my finger on top of it and I hang, and then it
yeah,
ends up doing this sort of coiling thing where one side of the rib cage starts to crunch. What are your thoughts about that as far as like coiling methods in regards to shoulders? You think
yeah.
it's
I've seen you do
you
that.
do you like coiling and pressing, or do you think it's much better to stay squared up and
Yeah,
pressing,
yeah.
or like you're saying, it's like there's no such thing as a bad movement pattern. There's just an untrained movement pattern. Would this sort of fall into that category? Yeah, the
I think a lot
coiling
of it.
stuff.
No, I actually like it. I've seen you do that stuff with
Yeah,
the most. I've watched you do
yeah.
that, and I think it looks great. I think it's really good because I think it's one of those things where you are in control and you're getting yourself into these ranges of motion that I think are challenging for you. But I like it because it seems like there's enough stability there, and you have something that you can actually like push into a little bit. So you could potentially
Exactly.
create tension and do like an isometric, contraction in that sort of end range for you, which I think in general is really, really good. So like even for somebody who, like we're talking about, is struggling to get up overhead, that might be something that'd be really helpful for them. Or in general, getting into, positions that are tough for people. And just using your own ability to contract and provide tension as opposed to relying on a 30-pound dumbbell or something, right? I think is a fantastic idea. So it's like, that's the beautiful thing. You don't even need, weight or a bunch of added resistance to do a lot of this stuff. Like all the warm up stuff we talked about. Right. But in general, I think the coiling aspect, I only pretty much know it through the conversations I've had with you. So I don't know too much about the topic. I don't want to, misspeak on the topic as a whole, but
Sure.
how I understand of what you're talking about, of like essentially letting your whole body kind of move in certain directions. Like if you're pressing with your right arm, allowing that rib cage to kind of maybe rotate a little or side bend to the left.
Yeah.
I think in general is an awesome movement for your body to be able to do. And I don't think you're saying like load it as heavy as you would anything else.
No, yeah, no, not at all.
Maybe like if you like we said, if you took the time to build up over time, I don't think that's a bad movement at all. I think that's probably like how we've been able to do. I mean, if you think about like what humans have had to do, it's like we haven't had these perfectly symmetrical dumbbells with a nice handle that's tailor made for our hand. So it's like, how do we get stuff overhead? I think probably not so much. Sometimes two armed, but on a single arm, I think that's probably more what we've done is like actually let your whole body move together in that way. And
Right.
yeah, and I think that's a big thing with shoulders that's kind of overlooked, is like with the legs, single leg stuff is really important and it can help you load more. And it also, there's a different aspect of rotation in the pelvis that happens with that. But in the upper body in particular, I think single arm stuff is really, really important and really awesome. And there's some people that I see where they come into me with an issue and they're doing some sort of program, at the gym. It's usually they're on their own. Doing machines and stuff like that, or just bench at a different type of gym. And then like all I will change is their program to just include more single arm stuff. So instead of having them do like a row machine with two arms and a bench with two, with a barbell or something, I'll just give them like a single arm dumbbell press, and I'll give them like a single arm cable row with their body sort of turned away a little bit so they can come across their body a little bit more, and like boom, problem solved. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot to that with how the shoulder is designed. You have these shoulder blades that sit at an angle, right? They're kind of at like a 30-degree, 45-degree tilt. And you have a rib cage that's round. So you have this like rounded shoulder blade that's like sitting at an angle around a round rib cage. So I don't think everything is supposed to be like two arm, super locked into position, straight up and down. Like the structure kind of shows us what we're capable of. And so you have, this shoulder blade that should be kind of rotating and moving and sort of coiling around this round,
Yeah.
cylindrical rib cage. And I think that's where a lot of people, I think the body in the movements that we do, or the movements that we don't do rather, can get in pain, is where there's like a lot of stiffness and compression. I think the coiling stuff, to your point, or just those kind of movements would help in general in the long term of relieving those kind of
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
I've
I
been,
think that
go ahead, Lucho. Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, I think we're learning more and more about the pros and cons of lifting, and what our body can benefit more from, right? Like we talked about with the dumbbells, barbells. Because I totally agree with what Mike said, what you're saying, that movements, we have more strength movement, compound movement, but no rotational movements, right? That real mobility. So I always include like the windmill with that dumbbell or kettlebell overhead. So it forces me to rotate that part of that body, right? Because that's hardly worked at, right? And I'm glad that we're bringing that up, because that's something that I don't think that we don't do enough of. But it's up because it's also complicated. Because
Yeah. And there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of trainers talking about this stuff
yeah,
either. I had only heard about it through the WEC guys, and not everybody knows. For those of you that don't know, WEC is the guy that invented the Bosu ball, but they have a whole method that involves this coiling. And then I went up north to this place, Gymnazo, and they really got deep into including the landmine into the coiling stuff. And that's when I really started to go, oh, this is really, not only am I getting my shoulders working, but I'm feeling my obliques working. I'm starting to feel my lats activating in ways that I hadn't really felt them activate before. and it's kind of fascinating. And the guy from the WEC method that sort of had the epiphany about this coiling thing, he tells a story about how it came to him, and he used to be a carpenter, and he would always have to carry these sheets of plywood, and the way he would carry it is one hand on top and one hand on the bottom, and he would end up coiling to carry this wood. If you can imagine what that would look like, you're carrying a big panel of wood on one side of your body. You got one hand hooked underneath the wood, and the other hand is on top, and you're sort of coiling to carry it.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, he's twisting and he's rotating, and then he was like, "Wait a second, how can I translate this sort of need into functional training methods?" And then this sort of coiling method started coming out of it, and yeah, and I caught on, but it's tough to coach because you say coiling to the layman member at the gym, and they're just like I'm used to this, and I'm like, no, let's turn it, and it's just like it just kind of like
It
doesn't
complicates it.
really lands. Yeah,
As simple it makes it seem for us.
yeah,
It's so complicated for the person that doesn't move, right? Because that's foreign. Because he doesn't do that. He doesn't move. He already doesn't move. Now you're telling him to perform a simple task that for you it's mindless, but for the body to really coordinate that, to twist and to be balanced, it gets complicated. Well,
so Harrison, so now we got. Let's imagine we got a trained bodybuilder, somebody who's been working at it. How would you say recommend that they can maintain the strength in the joint, but also how can they consider keeping the mobility in the joint, at the same time? I guess, like, what would be your approach to that for somebody who is not necessarily got an injury, but they're working toward it, all the bodybuilding stuff. Like, what would you say would be a good way to maintain that stability, but also including the mobility into it? And you might have already touched on it, but I'm just curious, as those out there that don't have anything now, but maybe down the road they would, something that they can incorporate into their training to sort of mitigate any issue that might arise.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's an aspect of it that's like, it's a spectrum, right? So it's like the stronger you are, the Arnolds of the world, in their heyday, right? It's like you're inherently going to have some limited mobility because your muscles are so big that it's actually going to, and they're so toned that there's that kind of tonic contraction that you're not going to be able to get to the same places that you would when you were 13, wet pool noodle or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think an aspect of that, right, where it's like the more muscle you put on, the higher tone you have, the harder it's going to be probably for you to get to certain ranges. But I think, to answer your question, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. Like, I think doing things, in multiple, like multi-planar type of movements, are a really good idea and really great for maintaining that. Like, for example, if somebody is like wanting to, do a pull down or train lats or whatever, right? Instead of doing like a two-arm pull down on a bar or something with the cable, they could do a one-arm pull down. They could have their body turned a little bit, so that the as the hand and the cable comes across comes back up to the anchor point, it kind of comes across their body a little bit, and then they could add like a little bit of rib cage movement. So sort of like a coil in a sense, right? Of like, as that arm is going back up, they're kind of side bending just a little bit to create that massive amount of length through the body, and then be doing that. So I think that is definitely where I would guide somebody, is to, like, massive amounts of strength, even if it's like a one arm pull up or something like that, like getting somebody into that type of thing, where you can have a massive amount of strength but also maintain a lot of mobility. Because when you're in the one arm positions, especially when your hand is locked, it allows you to sort of like move your body around it, so you get rotation. You can get ab and adduction, which is your arm coming across midline and away from midline. So making sure that you're that's what I mean by multiple planar. So doing some things where your arm is coming across your body. That could be like, a cable press around for a pec, or a sort of a like a reverse fly type of movement, right? The landmine stuff, again, I think is really, really great. You could load that really heavy, and there's just inherently so much nice mobility that would come with that. Yeah, those are the type of things that come to mind for me is when you're doing the two arm stuff. Again, it's going to lend to even more compression, and you don't really have a way to like get away from that sort of. But if you do the single arm, even if you're doing it super, super heavy, you have a little bit of rotation. Let's say you're doing a single arm press with like you said, a 200-pound dumbbell or something, right?
Yeah.
You at least have your other side to be able to kind of like roll towards a little bit as your shoulder blade comes around and it's reaching forward. It's going to kind of push you to the left. So it's like, when you have two hands, you're getting pushed both directions, and essentially all the compression's just going right to you. But when you're in one arm, you would have a lot more freedom of movement there and a lot more mobility gains with your strength gain. So that's something that I would, nudge that person.
So in a programming sense, would you say you would recommend, building strength, especially if you're going to be doing some heavy stuff to keep in the bilateral world, but then add in the unilateral stuff on, maybe every day or every other day, or, a couple times a week, to sort of balance out the working your strength, but keeping the mobility? Would you recommend something like that?
Yeah, and I don't even know that it has to be like a change of pace. Like eventually it could be like, especially if they're like, oh, this makes me feel really good. Like I like the way this feels. That could be the bread and butter. That could be, what they're doing when they're training heavy, like they're training single arm heavy. I think if you can do it right, like it shouldn't be like you shouldn't it shouldn't be a negative thing in terms of like you should still be able to push it as hard as a two arm thing. But again, there's a kind of a curve for some of those things. Like we talked about, like doing a one arm pull up, right? Like it's not like, okay, if you can do 10 two-arm pull-ups, then you could probably do like 2 one-arm pull-ups. Like, no, it doesn't really work like that, right? There's a giant gap there. There's a big learning curve of how to like, make that happen, right? So it's not always like that, but I would say, yeah, like a good place to start would be introducing it, once or twice a week. And then again, kind of, see where this is a pretty advanced lifter, it sounds like. So, see how it makes their body feel. And a lot of these muscles around the shoulders, around the rib cage, like the lat, for example, it's like it wraps around the rib cage, right? So it's not a like straight, up and down muscle with vertical fibers, right? It's got all these diagonal fibers, and it kind of wraps around, and it's sort of like, yeah, it's almost like a diagonal racing stripe around the body, So in a sense, like when you're doing that type of stuff where you're letting the arm come up and around you, it's actually you're actually more training the lat in terms of aligning with the fibers of the muscle. So you can like more highly bias a lat, let's say, by doing something that's a little bit like across your body, which you can't really do that with two arms, right? You can't really go across your body that much with two arms. So I think, especially for a bodybuilder who's like specifically trying to feel and like create connection to and like be able to contract and sort of pop out certain muscles, with a lot of these muscles, they're like, a lot of it comes down to the structure. If you look at the structure of the muscle, like what it actually looks like on the body in an anatomy textbook, right? Like it'll tell you a lot about, how it's going to be most biased. And a muscle like a lat, where it's very diagonal and kind of, curling around the body, wrapping around the body, it's going to need some sort of angle of movement like that. That's diagonal and curling around the body. So I think that if you're having that conversation with that athlete, like, that's kind of, an important part of getting the most out of each muscle. And if it's a bodybuilder, obviously that's kind of the goal, is like individualize training to the muscle. And I think the single arms would be really good for that.
So I've always had a thing with like clients of mine will come in with shoulder issues. And sometimes I'll ask them like, are you feeling it on a pull, or are you feeling on a push kind of thing, to kind of like delineate what it is that I could do with them or not do with them. What, or is there a diagnosis that's based on, like, if somebody's doing a pull and it hurts, is that specific to one of the areas of the shoulder, and vice versa with the push, is that also specific to one of the areas of the shoulder that would be something that we would be able to go like, oh, well, that's your anterior, delt, because you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Is there
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
is there something specific to the push or the pull that will equate to, like, that's a specific muscle or connector tendon
Yeah.
that's affected?
Right. Not as far as I know. I think probably what would take precedent over that would be the range where it happens, more so than the direction that you're going in. So, whether it's back behind, whether it's, for, I think, and the direction could definitely make it, could help you as well in sort of finding that. How I like to think about it is, whatever the position is in will tell you a lot about which tissues are like shortening or lengthening, or in a shortened state or a lengthened state. So, like, for a lot of people, they really struggle, that come to see me in particular for a shoulder issue. They really struggle to get their hand behind their back, like their lower back area, like that movement for most people, especially if there's a shoulder injury, is, pretty provoking, or just like very limited, right? So what's happening in that position is, certain muscles are shortening, certain muscles are lengthening, right? So, or any position for that matter. So when you're in that position with your hand behind your back, your bicep tendon has to lengthen quite a bit. Your anterior deltoid has to lengthen quite a bit. Your tricep, actually, your lower part of your tricep has to lengthen a bit, especially if you're trying to get the hand like up the back towards the shoulder blade. So, I think it's more like based on that. And then same thing if, like, you're going up overhead, like I'm looking at sort of the position in space and just like pause. Okay, in this position, okay, there's pain. All right. And then just understanding where the muscles are and who's getting lengthened and who's getting shortened. And then from there, I guess, if you were adding, some, resistance type of thing, right, in a push or a pull, then yeah, I think you could definitely get um, some more information based on that. So you're like, okay, if it hurts for me to be, with my elbow back behind, okay, does it hurt when I'm pushing? Yes. Does it hurt when I'm pulling? No. Okay, maybe that gives you a little bit more clarity in terms of differentiating. Is this a bicep tendon? Is this a,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think, but for me, it's more about positions and, compression around the rib cage or the shoulder. So is there a lot of compression happening in that position, or is a certain tissue, trying to lengthen here, and every time it tries to lengthen, it's ouch. That's sort of what I'm looking for.
Right.
So, yep.
Man, I think we are running out of time, but there's still more stuff we haven't
Shoulder
So
part
much.
two.
So there's so
Next,
much.
We might have to do
Yeah.
that.
yeah,
You
We have
know?
to have a part two here because
episode 2.
Yeah.
we're what exercises are going to benefit the real delt, the medial head, the front,
Mm-hmm.
the front, to maintain, to increase the strength, to reduce risk, mobility exercises before doing a certain exercise. So there's so many things that we could probably go on in this, but so maybe we could save this for
I
another.
guess you'll have to have me back sometime soon. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah, yeah.
so.
And it's a load of information.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah, man.
anyway,
That's why we saved it for
guys.
last.
yeah.
All
Exactly.
right.
To be continued. Cliffhanger.
So we'll leave it at that. But it was a fantastic conversation about shoulders and things that we all are kind of like experiencing. And I hope a lot of people get information based on our experiences, all the tips that Harrison you've mentioned, because they're all fantastic stuff, and it's stuff that we have to like keep sharing with our public. So
Absolutely.
so with that said, any last words?
For me, no, not really. I mean, I feel the same way. I feel like there's so much more I want to say about it, and yeah, I think for people they really struggle, and I would say this for a lot of clinicians and people in the rehab space is a tough one. I think people have been getting shoulders wrong for a really long time. So I think we need to be better as a rehab community. I think there's a lot more, a lot of improvement that can happen in the fitness community as well. So I'm really excited to, be working hard on trying to, learn everything I can to be the best resource for us at Real Fitness and for, everybody going forward. I think, shoulders are tricky, and, we can use all the help we can get in terms of finding, people who understand it and who care. So I'm happy to be here with you guys, and thank you so much for having me on.
Happy to have you, man. Thanks, Harrison.
Happy.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.
Good seeing everybody.